All right. Good morning, everybody. It is, I have to see what day it is. It's October 8th, 2025, here on the Dev Talk Show. And right across from me, you see my co host, Rich Ross. How is it going this morning?
Doing well, Chris. How are you? It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while since we've worked to get a full show in the morning. I think we've got a small video up where we talked about that a little bit. A little rainy out where we're at, and I had to turn on a bunch of lights. And I said, like, wow, the seasons have changed since the last time we've been on here.
Usually I kick off and start off with some kind of cool tech or something. I'd like to do that. But I do want to say that instead of that, right now, the one thing I do want to share is my favorite band of all time, Rush, is going back on tour in
Oh, wow.
2026.
I
So,
I
which is
didn't
kind
know.
of a huge feat. Last time they played was 2015, and there's some tour dates announced if you are in the States, well, and Mexico, because they're doing the Mexico date. But super excited and trying to get into the pre-sale and all that. So that will happen next week.
But
Yep,
we're going to build a model context protocol server. That's the right way to say that.
that is the goal. Yes.
And but in order to do that, generally speaking, you need something to share. I was going to try to be cute and say something to model, but that's not really right. You need a context to serve. Um, and so often that time that's going to start with data.
Yes.
So we are
Yeah.
starting today with SQL Server and the data API builder.
Yes. Because as you may know, Model Context Protocol offers three things. They offer tools, they offer resources, and they offer prompts. So the most popular of those three things is the tool side of it, and that's where we're going to start from. Hopefully, we can build on and maybe do some resources and do some prompts in there as well. But taking the data that we have that's usually locked up, in this case, it's just going to be a SQL Server data that we have sitting in Azure, and how can we put that API over top of it? Now, we did try and look at this months ago when we were trying to do the static websites and talk to Cosmos DB, and that worked well because there was already built in for the data API builder to talk to Cosmos DB.
Okay.
In this case, we're going to go ahead and kind of create our own. So um, what I'm going to do here is let's go back to the data API builder. So this is, um, and you can see all of the interesting data data endpoints that it supports, right? So SQL Server, Azure SQL, Cosmos, Postgres, Azure Database with Postgres, MySQL. There's all kinds of different and data storage places that we can put an API over in relatively, 45 minutes. Um, so just looking at the clock. So sorry. Um, I'm a little punchy this morning. I woke up like 30 minutes before showtime. So coffee's still kicking it.
Yeah, I understand. First of all, just as it says right there on the screen, this is a product that you can use completely through Azure, but it's also open source,
Yeah.
and there's a GitHub repository.
Yes. And there was a recent update to it. I think I have the recent update on here. It's essentially a tool that you bring in. So if we do, let's do this. So if I go back to my component.net tool, and it does kind of remember. So it must have been in here. It's already installed. So why doesn't list work?
How about .NET Tool List Global? Because you may have installed it. I don't know if that'll make a difference.
Yeah,
Okay.
good point. Okay.
Yeah. You have installed the Data API Builder CLI. And to be
Yep.
clear, the Data API Builder itself is it provides a REST API over a database. That's like the simple explanation. However, we also know there is support for GraphQL APIs as well, just to make that clear.
Hmm.
But in this particular case, because we're in SQL Server, uh, I'm not trying to say that obviously the GraphQL API we explored, but it seemed to me that there is a lot of flexibility and power in the manifest file to really customize this. It's not just like, okay, do whatever you want. I mean, you could certainly get going that quickly,
Yeah.
But then now to dial into what you really want to expose to your callers, it looks like we'll have some options. We'll see what we get to today here. So
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So, and that's, you'll see when I go ahead and do the kind of next command, which is SQL, I'm sorry, DAB, dash dash, I think it's just DAB init. And we can give it all the configuration there as well. So if I had a connection string, let's just do init. And it's going to want some parameters. So let's go back to the docs. So we do init, Docker pull Docker. You can do this in a container as well because that can, oh no, that's the database container. So yeah, so the init requires some configuration information,
mhm.
at least these three things: database type,
Mhm.
which in our case be MS SQL, host mode, which will start with development but move up to production, and then the actual connection string. Okay.
So I'm looking at my screen now, just so you know.
Yeah.
And here we are in the DAB documentation. And so just to kind of maybe put a little bit more of a point on what was done here is a little bit earlier we installed the data API builder CLI. We did that using this command right here. And let's see, scroll down a little bit, make it a little bit bigger. You had the database running already. Now it's just for that was the database in, is it an Azure SQL database?
It is.
Okay.
Yes. We will see that in a second, I
Yep.
think.
And then here, this command was run here, although not the one that you're looking at. This is a fake command out of the documentation, but it's DAB init, database type of SQL, host mode development, and then the connection string to your actual database. And then I think we can do things like, we're going to do some of this stuff in a little bit to test it, but um, I think part of it that I was interested in is that you come out with this, with an initialization file. So if you are ready,
Just about, I just want to do one quick check of this.
okay.
Oh,
Um,
okay. We'll save that. I'm going to close that.
in their quick
Now,
start here, they show creating the configuration file, and then they didn't actually open the configuration file. It seems like that's what we're going to do. So,
yep. And I'll get rid of the chat too, because we don't need that right now. Okay. So yeah, let's come on back.
there we go.
Cool. So what we have here is based on the instructions we gave it, you can see some of the things that it kind of dropped in for us, right? So it knows our database type is SQL.
Oops.
It
No, you're fine. Go ahead. Sorry.
okay. It did have a connection string here. I dropped that in favor of using an environment file with those variables in it. Now, those environment variables can be injected. They can, come from other sources. But the idea is that it's not sitting here for us all to see. Um, and then we can look at some of the other parts, which are really, so this all talks about the data source. There's a section here about the runtime. So what is it that we're going to be essentially generating when we do this? So important here is probably this section here, which is, our REST component, right? So REST is going to be enabled. You're going to have slash API, request body strict. I believe that's related to the JSON structure of the request body, but we can go back and look at the properties on that. But you can see we also have sections here for GraphQL, as well as an overall host section where we can put things like cores or credential or allow credentials and things like that. So this is what we get out of the box. It does have our development mode here as well that we defined. And then I think the other thing right here that we're going to have to complete on our own is the entities. Now, there is certainly a way to do the tooling uh, with the data API builder and say, well, just add this entity to it. I I'll be honest. I think I wind up using mostly when I do this, I do mostly through the JSON and just kind of add my entity into there. There's not too many properties, and we can take a look at that and see what we need to kind of put in place. So um, it's not without having the entities in there though, right? With this being empty, the API call isn't going to give us anything back, essentially, right? We're not going to have any information to display because there's no entities listed. And the entities essentially map to the tables that you have in your database. Um, so with that, let's see. I want to try and do this the um,
Okay, so
kind of the
while you're
right way. Go
working on
ahead.
that, request body
Yeah.
strict, I found in the documentation, it looks to me like what they're saying there is I don't know how new that field is. It says request body strict was introduced to help simplify .NET POCO objects. And then there is a whole section on it where they kind of say what some of these things are.
Yeah.
Columns with the default value are ignored during insert only when their value in the payload is null. As a consequence, insert operations in the default columns when request body strict is true can't result in explicit null values. To accomplish this, an update operation is required. And then they say columns with the default aren't ignored during update, regardless of the payload value. Computed columns are always ignored, and auto-generated columns are always ignored. So it sounds, again, without really thinking too deeply about what they've done there, it sounds like they said, okay, people are trying to use .NET objects, and we even ran into this a little bit. Is the slight differences the way people set up C# POCO objects versus what's coming in JSON. They're just trying to make that simpler, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, cool. Okay. So thank you for that. That's awesome. Um, Chris Copilot there for us, folks. I'm going to see. I think I have a SQL Server instance here, and I'm pretty sure I should have a connection.
So you're in Visual Studio Code using is it still the MS SQL plugin is what it's called? I'm trying to remember. Essentially, something that people may be unfamiliar with is that Azure Data Studio is retiring, has retired, and basically the features were moved into yes, right there, the SQL Server.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's the
I've
one
been
that
using that myself. So
I have. I like it. I think
yeah,
it captured a lot of stuff that Data Studio had. So it's almost good with having like one tool there. Connection
yeah.
error. Oh, I know why that is. Okay. It's a good thing we checked that there. Um, so it's been a little bit since I've connected to that SQL Server, but that shouldn't be a problem because that data still will be there.
They have an example of that request body strict here, and
Oh, cool.
they have a users table that has these fields, and they're trying to give you all these different examples of in your table in SQL. You maybe you have an your primary key is an auto generated column, right? It could be that's just the
Hmm.
simple ID, and then you've got a column that has a default, a column that has a default, and then oh, here's a computed column, and they're saying, okay, so what we're gonna do is um, if you request these things, then what really happens is you, even though someone put in the request an ID, well, that was auto generated. Somebody put in
Okay.
extra fields. Somebody put in a value for the computed column, and but the computed column shouldn't work. So what they said is they said, okay, the default values were applied by the database. The is minor field was ignored because it's computed. The extra field was ignored, and then we generated the ID value for you anyway. So that makes
Mm.
sense. It was probably maybe in the earlier days of the data API builder, people had to work around the fact that there were rules in the database and there were computations in the database and defaults, and they wanted them applied more faithfully. But then somebody comes along and says, well, here's my update payload, and it's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. We don't allow that, right? So that's
Right.
cool. I think that's a nice thing.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Now, one question that I had is, you had told me that this was a SQL Server with AdventureWorks. Is that all
Yes.
available if you're in Azure SQL, whether you're in the portal or not? Is that just something you can install pretty quickly?
Yeah, it's one of the
Just a Okay.
it's one of the default databases that you can bring in. I think Northwinds is the other one.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Well, our old friend Northwinds and AdventureWorks.
yeah, and I think when I did it, I was actually using like when I originally created it, I used a bicep file.
We are using the SQL Server plugin and you are
Hmm.
connected to a database that's in Azure SQL and it's
Yep.
good old fashioned AdventureWorks.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's so because it's AdventureWorks, we have things like product, and I can, quickly show, hey, let's look at that's designer. That's not what we want. We want to just do a SQL or a query on that. So select the top 1000. It runs it for us automatically. You see that we get all those rows. So that's all sitting inside of this database sample database that got created for us off the fly. But that's cool because we have products here. So we
Okay.
can actually go back to, um, I didn't realize that table was going to be there. So if I do, let's go.
So this is the heart of the data API builder right here is that we've got a database you with one line from a command line you've got a, a built one and you have a configuration file, but now you're going to put an entity in the configuration file.
Yep. Yeah. So this is the important bit, right?
Yep.
So having this entity be to open up the communication between the API and that entity there. So if I go back to here and we do, um, it does start to give me all this for me, right? So um, that's not too far off. That looks pretty good actually. So let's go with that. So we'll talk through what these are. Don't worry about that. So products, that's what we're going to call it. So if you think about whatever is here, this is going to map to a slash API slash this name,
Yep.
right? That's the entity that we're calling.
Right.
The source for that is going to be products. Now it knows that because it's the database coming off of here. So it
Mm-hmm.
probably should be product,
It can sort
even
of
though,
infer that by it already knows the connection string, and so it I imagine it just says like, well, if you put product in here, I'm going to start by seeing if that's a table. Maybe it does some other things. Maybe it could also be a view, but
right.
I don't know that I want to dive too much into guessing what you can do. The key here is to me on line 33 where you have capital products. That's an arbitrary label you are giving this entity. You could call it like
Yep.
Eat It Joe's or Superman or whatever. But in this case, so that it makes more sense, it's products.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because you always want those API endpoints to have some kind of relevance to the data that it stores and
Yeah.
make it, kind of easier for the developer team to figure out where things are. This section down here around permissions is equally important, right? So right now we're in the role of anonymous. You can have anonymous, or you can have authenticated. Um, Authenticated. Yeah, that's what we want. The difference is that, as you can imagine, right, the anonymous one, I'm going to very easily be able to get access to, um, uh, get access to the information, and then the authentication one is going to require some kind of key or token to be able to access that information. That we'll talk about that. We won't get to see that today, but so because I think it's important to talk about, and we can talk about it now, I guess. And the reason why it is a little more complicated in what we've got with the 15 minutes that are left. So what happens is your SQL environment is essentially has a um, I'm sorry, to take the story. Well, SQL, so your SQL environment is the kind of the back end part of things. Your data API builder is going to talk to that based off of what that connection string has, right? So whatever mechanism, so that's how it does the authentication part.
Mm-hmm.
To authenticate against the data API, you would create an app registration and expose this essentially as an API endpoint. And
Mm-hmm.
then you would create another app registration that your client app, whatever that is going to essentially need to get a token from Entra ID, and included in that token
Mm-hmm.
is a scope to be able to talk to this API at the data API layer. So it's kind of a couple. There's a couple of hops that happen, but essentially that API token that your time or that token that your client request needs has to include access to that API,
Yep.
the data API app registration.
Right. And it looks like there's three. I'm just looking at the docs that you can put an anonymous, authenticated, or make your own custom role. And so it sounds to me like what you're saying to data API is, um, In some cases, perhaps, I don't know that this would be the case in what we're doing. You could say, look, you don't need any authentication token to access this resource.
Yeah,
But in your case, um, you can create a custom role, or you can do what you're doing here. I actually, and basically, and it's like an additional thing that you're doing with the actions is saying that you're just not going to let people write here.
right. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you could have additional permissions underneath that, so the CRUD capabilities. So we're
Okay.
just going to leave this as read,
All right. Cool.
and um, I'm going to save it.
Yeah, it's an
So
array.
we've got
Select
a
one or more rows. Yeah, that's interesting to me. It makes me feel like while you're saving it and getting moving on, it makes me feel like you could have a permission set that's a little bit more powerful, but then the data API builder could still restrict that. That might be interesting to play with. Is that
yeah,
a user that has more power, but then set it to read and then try to update and see what it does? So
right. And think about what this is, right? This isn't going to be your enterprise API
yeah,
endpoint. If
exactly.
you're doing that, this is small project.
Hmm.
This is proof of concept. This is, hey, how can I get something up and running and see you know how much effort is going to be to kind of make it more resilient and all this other kind of thing. So this is just really a simple,
And then
cool.
yeah, I'm still here in the data API builder documentation, and some of their selling points for it are that I'm gonna when I say they, the documentation is what I mean. The documentation is saying that supports SQL Server, Azure SQL databases, Azure Cosmos DB, PostgreSQL, MySQL, and SQL Data Warehouse. So there's a lot of support. You can do GraphQL. Generally speaking, I imagine a lot of people start the way we do. And then because it's open source, you could run it in any cloud. You could run it on prem if you wanted to. However, a little bit later, they say it's free with no premium tier.
Hmm.
So that's just what it says here. I haven't gone to look at what it says on the Azure site. Best of all, it's truly free with no premium tier and runs statelessly anywhere. Features a cross-platform CLI, open telemetry, health checks, Swagger for REST endpoints. I mean, and these are a lot of things that if you've built a lot of ASP.NET Core web APIs, there's
Mm-hmm.
this whole battery of things that, and when I say you, it could be you, Rich, it could be you watching. There's probably this
Yeah.
whole battery of things that you do after you've finished the new project startup if you haven't already put it into a template or maybe a standard repository. And here, it's like, hey, we did it. We did a lot of that stuff for you. So, um, you were mentioning earlier, I think the general developer discomfort with things like this. You didn't say that, but that's the impression I got when the documentation is saying we've done a lot for you and we have security, we have granular security controls, a flexible policy engine, we pass,
Logging.
we have logging. It's like, I don't know, maybe it's so easy for us, the developers, to say like, oh, I don't really want to use this in production, but well, I mean, here we are. So, um, all right, all
That's
right,
cool.
Rich, got to get moving.
Yep. Me
Um,
too.
Anything else for the show, or we are out of here?
We are out of here.
Okay, we'll see you all hopefully on Friday. For Rich, I'm Chris, and we'll see you all next time on the Dev Talk Show.